Hey people, Vintage Zach here. Today I'm going to be talking about 80s trucker hats. I find them all the time at flea markets and yard sales and sometimes even thrift stores. And I thought I'd make a video about how to check to see if they're good quality, to see if they're still wearable, which ones are valuable, and kind of how I take pictures and stuff of them and sell them. Let me know down below if there's anything I missed in the video, and subscribe if you can. Thanks for watching. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is 3 common flaws that these hats have that you should check for whenever you're buying. Whenever I find them, I usually find a big box of them, so I usually just try to buy the whole box. Usually people don't value them at a super high value, so it's easy to buy the whole box. Like, I think the box I bought a couple boxes and I paid about $5 to $10 each per box. So I checked a few of the hats, but I knew that in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the hats would be salvageable and a few of them wouldn't be. And that's pretty much how every box goes. But to start, I'll show you this hat. This is just, a pretty generic trucker hat. It's got a mesh back. That's why it's called a trucker hat. Nothing too special about this. This isn't what I would call like a very valuable hat. It's probably anywhere from worth $5 to $20. But if you find a bunch of them, you can still make money selling them as a lot or individually too. It just depends on the subject matter, as does a lot of clothes. So the 3 main things that could be wrong with it, I'll start out with the first thing, and that is you need to make sure that the brim is firm and not cracking. A lot of times a brim could become very stiff in storage and it will crack, like it's almost like a chip. And throughout this video I'll be putting in other little clips of me showing examples. I will say that sometimes whenever you find a hat and it does break, you need to just start learning gradually which hats sell the best for you. And sometimes if it's a better hat, even with a broken brim, it can sell. And even with any of these 3 things wrong, it can sell. It really just matters about the subject matter, like all vintage clothing, like how shirts, if there's holes, if there's stains, sometimes they still sell depending on what it is. But this hat's great. It's got great bend to it still. And believe me, you'll know when the brim is messed up because it cracks super easy. The next thing that you're going to want to look at is the snaps on the back. This is probably the most common looking snap. It's just one row of snaps, but there's also, ones with double layer of snaps. There's ones that are thinner, and pretty much these are the most common. You pretty much just, whenever you're buying, just make sure that it snaps and unsnaps. And it's just a really simple thing to do, but when you're in the moment, sometimes you forget. What can happen is all of these, especially all the hats that I bought in this lot, I think they've been stored since the 80s. So they've been in a garage, in an attic, or somewhere for 40 years. And in those types of places, there's lots of variability in the heat. It can be really hot at points, it could be really cold, and clothing is just not meant to be in those types of variables without being worn just sitting there. And so much like t-shirts dry rot, hats become brittle. Snaps especially, sometimes I've seen them morph together and it's really hard to tell, and whenever you go to unsnap them, these little nubbies will break off into this other part. I've also seen it just completely snap off, like right on each of these. I will say that I've heard it's easy to replace these snaps. So if you find a really good hat, like some of the ones I'll show later in the video, it could be worth it to replace the snaps. And honestly, I would buy it if it was a specific hat. But for something like this, it's more like, might be just a throwaway piece at that point. The last issue that these could have, I mean, obviously there could be other issues with there being, stains on the top and just like maybe some holes in the mesh. Normally that doesn't happen, especially if they're not worn at all. But and most of the ones that I found today just weren't worn at all. But the big issue is the foam on the inside of the hat could be deteriorating. This is probably the most common case, and whenever you find a box of vintage hats, you will almost 100% of the time find at least one in there that is like this. And like I mentioned before, it does have to deal with the variability of heat and not being worn, but also just like all these hats were made by different people. I mean, a lot of people collect vintage hats by just going around wherever they went for work, and they would just grab free ones here and there. And so many people made these hats, so who knows what the quality of the foam was on each one. But when the foam starts to deteriorate on one of these hats, you will know. Um, there's kind of a couple different ways that it'll crack. Some of them just start to crack a little bit and they're still wearable, but other ones completely disintegrate, and you will tell super fast because it literally is like a puff of smoke. And for someone with allergies like me, it just is horrible because it's like gets everywhere and you breathe it in. I opened these hats up inside, and it was kind of a big mistake because the flakes got kind of everywhere. Um, but yeah, if the foam does deteriorate, it's probably the easiest fix out of all of these issues because you can literally just clean it out. You just take it outside and just hit it off your leg or off the ground, and all of them will come out. It's just the hat will lose its shape, and obviously it's a lot more desirable to have the hat with its shape with the original foam in. Um, so I guess it's kind of up to you if you want to keep the hat or not if the foam is not in it. I've seen other ones which make it a little bit more complicated when there's a piece of fabric kind of sandwiching the foam between the outside of the hat. And in that instance, the foam stays in there, and you pretty much have to cut the fabric out to get all the foam out of there. But yeah, that's pretty much the three major flaws that these hats can have, and that's what you should look for if you ever see them in person. I know firsthand, like when you're in the moment, it's really easy to forget to do all these things, especially when you're finding a good find, you're excited and everything else. But I think it's important to address the cost and figure out, in your mind, make it a habit of thinking, what can I possibly get out of this bundle? And is it worth it for me to spend $5 on 30 hats in a box? And usually it is because you can lock them up, you can sell them individually, and you'll make your money back some way or another. And I think that's why selling vintage hats is probably one of the best ways to make money in vintage clothing that people don't really talk about. Just because there's so many of them and a lot of people look for them. But yeah, I would say a majority of the time it's going to be worth picking up these hats. I'm going to show you a few of the hats that I found recently that are some of the better hats that you should look for. I don't always find these hats. Obviously, they're a bit rarer, and you can make a lot of money off these hats. And just honestly, hats in general, like 90s sports hats. There's a lot of people that look for that kind of stuff, but these hats are from the 80s, and these are more desirable hats that you should look out for. So first up are these three-stripe hats. Three-stripe hats are trucker hats that have three stripes on the side. This is a Grand Ole Opry one. Three stripes on the side. This one isn't super desirable, but it's not like the least desirable. I would say this is one of the most desirable. Any kind of old drinks, any type of old like food product, anything like that with a three stripe is really desirable. I've seen some of these hats go for $300, depending on the condition. I mean, this one, the brim is kind of bent, if you can tell that, and the foam on the inside is starting to crack. So this isn't as much, but it's still $100 hat, if not more. Super cool, and it's definitely something you should look out for because a lot of farmers and just other people have gotten this for free over the years, and there are a lot of these out there that they're pretty cool. Here's another 3-stripe. This one is a pretty generic one. It's Ritchie Metals. This one actually just sold on eBay for $50 plus shipping, which I think is a very good price for this hat, especially because it's a pretty generic, just company name. But it just goes to show how desirable these 3-stripe hats can be, considering I only had it listed for like 24 hours or less, and it sold for that. So definitely cool hats to look for. Obviously, all the 3 factors are great with this. It's got the good brim, it's got good snaps, and the foam is there. But definitely a good sale, and I'm really happy that I ended up picking this up. Next is probably the best hat you can find, or at least like one of the best, is just vintage John Deere hats in general. The most desirable John Deere hats are the ones with patches on them. This one has a pretty long patch, and it's for a specific business, so obviously lots of factors could help and hurt the value. I think the name of the business may hurt the value a bit, but the color and just the fact that it's brand new, like it doesn't seem worn at all, could definitely help the value. And the shape is like awesome. This one doesn't have foam in it, it just is like a stiff material, and I think that's better just because you won't have to deal with the flakiness or anything like that. Definitely a really cool hat, and I was pumped to find it because I rarely find these anymore. I probably find about 3 a year, and it's always just such a good feeling finding one of these, because these are, sometimes these could sell for $100 or more, and pretty fast too, because there's a lot of people that collect these. This box right here are the hats that I decided I'm going to throw away. They basically all have something significantly wrong with them that I don't think will be able to be sold. A good example of the broken foam is right here. Now, this one is actually an easier case to clean out. If it was a good hat, you could clean it out and peel it out. But a lot of them have a kind of like a piece of fabric that covers this foam so that the foam gets stuck inside the hat. And this hat is nothing special, so I don't really feel too bad about throwing it away, especially because I only paid around $5 for the box. So it's really not that big of an issue throwing away a hat like this, but it just is something to look out for. So the next hat that has an issue is this AOL hat. By inspection, it looks pretty good, like the foam and the snaps all work, but basically the brim, see how that cracks? And basically the brim has gotten all brittle and pretty much unsellable. I've seen some high dollar hats sell with a broken brim, so I guess look up what the hat is beforehand. But for this hat, it's nothing crazy, so it's not worth saving. It seems like a very hard fix to fix the brim. Here's an example of a hat that the foam has worn away and is now sitting at the bottom underneath this fabric. This hat, Pittsburgh Press, would have been cool to keep or sell, but with this foam, it makes it a lot harder. And like I was saying, it's possible you could cut this fabric out and clean it out, but it takes a lot away from the hat. It's going to be super flimsy if you take away that. Also, I will add, for workroom purposes, if you are opening a box of these hats that haven't been opened in a long time, these foam flakes get everywhere and it is a pain to clean up. So I'd suggest doing this outside if you can. And yeah, it just sucks to breathe it in and just have it everywhere in the room after. So yeah, I also have a lint roller, because a lot of the hats will have this on it even if they don't even if their foam is fine, it's just other hats will break apart and get on them. So I like to lint roll it all off. That's kind of what I have been doing for all the other hats. But yeah. So all of that footage was me taking pictures of stuff and kind of putting in lots, getting ready to sell on my Instagram or on eBay. If nobody is interested in individual hats on Instagram, I'll probably just put it up as a whole lot on eBay. And I've learned that that's a pretty easy way to sell, especially if you found a bunch of the hats, in a box for $5, selling 9 or 12 of them for $50 or $55 shipped. It's still a great profit, especially when you find these fairly often and you pick out some of the better pieces to sell individually. To wrap this whole video up, vintage trucker hats are one of my favorite things to sell, and I think that they're a pretty underrated thing to sell. They sell fast, and there's a big audience for them. So next time you're out looking and you see them, you should probably pick them up. They're a good investment, especially if you can buy a lot for a cheap price, and it's usually how it goes. It's definitely worth it. Make sure to look at all of those factors that I told you, and make sure to not get caught up in the moment. Actually take time to check, especially if you're just buying 1 or 2 hats. I've got excited and found like a John Deere hat or like a Steelers hat and a couple other things that when I took it home, I was like, oh crap, because the snaps were broke, or the foam, I didn't notice it was cracking a lot, or I didn't try to bend the brim. And all those factors can really significantly hurt the value, especially if it's something that is not super desirable. Like I've seen a couple of those Pepsi Cola hats with the 3 stripes sell with really bent brims, and it just goes to show that some of those hats do sell well still. But you just never know. So it's always worth to pick it up if you can get it for a good deal. That concludes the video for today, guys. Thank you for watching, and make sure to hit that subscribe if you can. And thank you for watching. See you later.